She's just a nobody, my mom said, until my brother's fiancée Googled my name. Everything changed. So, my name's Melissa Harrison. I'm 32 now, a writer, and I live in Chesterfield, Virginia. But this story isn't about now. It's about then. About growing up in a house where I might as well have been invisible. My parents, Barbara and Joel, had one child before me, Nathan. And Nathan was everything. Star athlete, top of his class, varsity everything, science fair winner, you name it. By the time I was born, they already had a golden child. And me? I was the extra, the footnote, the one who had to find her own seat at the table, even if there technically was one waiting for her. I don't remember the exact moment I realized I didn't matter as much, but the memories are peppered with scenes that feel like slow bruises. I remember being maybe 7 or 8, coming home from school clutching this crumpled certificate I got for winning a regional short story contest. It was a silly story about a squirrel that ran a detective agency, hand-drawn cover and all. I had folded it like treasure. I'd worked hard on that thing. My teacher even read it out loud to the class. I left it on the kitchen counter so my mom could see it when she got back from work. That night, she wiped down the counters and never noticed it. It got coffee-stained the next morning, then stuck to the bottom of a cereal bowl. No one ever read it. It ended up in the trash 3 days later, still folded like a gift that never got opened. Meanwhile, the hallway was lined with Nathan's trophies and ribbons. Framed newspaper clippings of his swim meets. Medals displayed like family heirlooms. His room looked like a damn museum. Mine was mostly shelves I filled myself with paperbacks and scribbled drafts. No one ever asked what I was writing. They just called it my little hobby. My dad once told a neighbor I was quiet but creative. That was the nicest summary I ever got from him. Most of the time, I was just Melissa, the one who got left behind at school because someone forgot what time the bell rang. I wasn't a bad kid. I didn't get in trouble. I didn't scream for attention. Maybe that was the problem. I got straight A's, too. Just not the kind that made people cheer at award ceremonies. I loved literature. Language made me feel seen in a way people didn't. But in that house, books weren't worth much if they couldn't win you a scholarship or a championship. Once, when I was 10, Nathan broke his wrist during a lacrosse match. My parents rushed to the ER, called family, even updated his old high school coach just because. 2 days later, I came home crying because a girl in my class called me weird and told everyone I wrote love poems to fictional characters. My mom barely looked up from her iPad. She told me to just ignore jealous kids. And that was it. At 13, I was invited to a statewide writing camp. I needed a parent to drive me. My mom said it conflicted with Nathan's college tour weekend. Maybe next year, she told me. There was no next year. My brother went on to Princeton. My parents practically held parades when the acceptance letter arrived. I don't even remember what I had for dinner that night. Probably something microwaved while they called relatives to brag. By the time I was 17, I'd stopped showing them things. My essays, the short stories I published in small journals, even the award I got for Best Original Fiction in the county. I stuck it in a box under my bed and never brought it up. They noticed things about Nathan, like when his voice changed, when he started shaving, when he stopped calling home as much. But me? I cut 10 inches off my hair once. No one said a word. I remember one Thanksgiving, I told them I was submitting my first manuscript. It was a YA novel, nothing groundbreaking, but it meant everything to me. My dad said, "Is that the one with the magical owls, or whatever?" It wasn't. He never asked again. By 23, I'd moved out. My parents helped Nathan with a down payment on his condo. I rented a studio over a garage with a leaking roof and wrote during thunderstorms with towels under my laptop. I sent them the published version of that first novel. No reply. A few weeks later, my mom forwarded me a local news article about Nathan's company launching a new fitness app. Subject line: "Look how great your brother is doing." Even now, I don't know if they read my books. I've published 4. Moderate success. Enough to live on. My name's on the spine. Still, not once have they brought it up. Sometimes, I wonder if they remember the things they forgot. The recital they missed. The way they left my spelling bee early because Nathan had a baseball game. The year they didn't notice I spent Christmas alone in my dorm room because they assumed I was with friends. It's weird, growing up in a house full of noise and never being truly heard. I don't hate them. I don't even think they're bad people. I just think some parents pour so much into one child that there's nothing left for the others. And if you're quiet, if you don't scream or slam doors or break things, they assume you're fine. But I wasn't fine. I was just surviving. Quietly. Invisibly. That was my childhood. That's what being Melissa in the Harrison house felt like. And sometimes, I still wonder what that squirrel detective would have grown into. If someone had just cared enough to read the first page. I moved to New York this summer after my 22nd birthday with a suitcase for unpublished short stories and a folder full of polite rejections from magazines that at least bothered to use my name. My parents didn't say much when I left. My mom handed me a Tupperware container of frozen meatloaf like I was headed off to camp instead of starting a life. My dad gave me $20 for gas, even though I didn't own a car. I don't think they believed I'd stay more than a month. Before I left, I had gotten a short piece published in this small lit mag out of Portland. I emailed the PDF to my mom with a note that said, "Thought you might like this." She never responded. When I asked her about it over the phone a week later, she said, "I skimmed it. I just don't get stories where nothing happens. Anyway, how's the job hunt? Found anything real yet?" I told her I was going to work at a coffee shop while I focused on writing. She sighed like I'd announced I was taking up professional kite flying. New York wasn't magical. It was loud and wet and expensive in ways I hadn't even imagined. I crashed with a girl I'd met through a college roommate, sleeping on a lumpy futon in a windowless room that got humid even in winter. My first job was at a bakery in Queens that specialized in gluten-free muffins and overpriced lattes. I made minimum wage, wore a cap that smelled like stale flour, and tried not to cry when customers snapped their fingers at me. I wrote at night, always. After 8-hour shifts on my feet, after folding aprons and scraping milk residue off the espresso wand, I'd go back to that little corner of borrowed space and open my laptop. I wrote stories that made no money and barely made sense, but they were mine. Some nights I fell asleep with the laptop still open on my chest, blinking cursor dancing in a sea of half-written thoughts. The first few months were brutal. I submitted stories to every journal that accepted unsolicited work. Most of the time, I didn't even get a form rejection, just silence. Every time my phone buzzed with an unknown email address, my heart leapt. Every time it turned out to be spam or a sale from a bookstore I couldn't afford to shop at, that hope cracked a little more. Still, I kept writing. It felt like the only thing in my life that made sense. Back home, my parents would call sometimes, always with the same tone, like they were checking in on a teenager babysitting for the first time. My mom asked if I had considered going into teaching or maybe copywriting. "You know," she'd say, "something that uses your skills but also pays the bills." I'd tell her I was working on a novel. She'd pause for a second and then change the subject to my brother's new promotion. I got published again that fall, a story in a mid-tier online magazine. It wasn't big, but it was something. I printed it out and mailed a copy to my parents. No text, no note, just the story and my name in print. A week later, I got a voicemail from my mom. "I saw your little piece," she said. "That's sweet. Just remember, writing is a great hobby, but it's not a real career. Don't let it distract you too much." Distract me from what? From bagging croissants and learning how to clean a clogged milk steamer? From watching my roommate get a job in marketing while I counted quarters to buy printer paper? I didn't respond. There was a kind of loneliness in those years that I still don't have the right words for. It wasn't just being broke or exhausted. It was the feeling that no one thought what I was doing mattered. I wasn't some misunderstood genius. I was just a girl with a Word doc and a tired back and a family that saw my ambition as a phase I'd eventually outgrow. When the rejection letters came, and they always came, I stopped telling anyone. I didn't want to hear my mom say, "I told you so." She wouldn't even say it mean. She'd say it like she was being helpful, like she was trying to guide me back to reality before I wasted too much time chasing smoke. One winter, I picked up extra shifts at the bakery because the other barista got mono. I worked 13 days in a row, opened every morning at 6, burned my hand on the espresso machine 3 times, and still stayed up late to finish a short story I'd been reworking since college. I sent it out to 10 different magazines. 9 rejected it. 1 published it. And that one moment of yes made the other 99 worth it. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even tell my friends. I just sat in the back of the bakery on my break, eating a day-old scone, reading my own story on my cracked phone screen like it was some ancient artifact I'd unearthed. The dream was always there, buried under the hours and the bills and the quiet comments from people who meant well. People who said things like, "Must be nice to have a passion," or "Maybe one day you'll write a bestseller and we'll say we knew you when." As if my life was just the waiting room for something that hadn't started yet. But for me, the writing was the life. Even when it didn't pay. Even when no one believed in it. Even when I couldn't believe in myself. That's what those years were. Not glamorous, not tragic. Just a slow fight to hold on to a dream when everyone around me was gently nudging me to let it go. There was a turning point, but it didn't come with fireworks or champagne or some montage of me holding trophies. It came in the form of a woman named Eleanor Devine, though she never used her last name, not even in her own bylines. She was a legend in the literary world, the kind of editor people whispered about in MFA lounges and independent bookstore readings, the kind who had discovered half the writers I idolized. I met her at a reading in Brooklyn where I was helping set up chairs. She complimented the intro I'd written for the event program and asked if I wrote fiction. I told her I did, but mostly rejections. She smiled like she'd heard that line before and said, "Send me something that doesn't bore me." I did. 3 days later, she called. Not emailed, called. Said the dialogue was stiff, but the emotional core hit like a punch. Said my metaphors were too eager, but that I was close. She worked with me on that story for almost 4 months. No pay, no promises. Just line edits, voice notes, and occasional text messages that read like Zen koans. One time she wrote, "Don't end scenes with silence unless you mean it. Silence is a full sentence." I still think about that one. She never coddled me. She told me when my work sounded like I was trying to impress people. She made me cut beautiful sentences if they didn't serve the story. She told me to stop hiding my anger behind lyricism. When I finally broke through, it was because she cracked me open. The day she forwarded my story to a mid-tier magazine and said, "You're ready," I cried in the bathroom at work between wiping down tables. A year later, I had enough stories to compile a collection. I titled it Echoes in the Quiet. It was mostly about girls like me, quiet girls, overlooked girls, girls who made themselves small until they broke in strange, unexpected ways. Eleanor sent it to a few places. Most said no. One said yes. Then everything happened at once. The reviews started trickling in. First a blog I admired, then a regional paper, then a tiny quote in the Times Art section that said my work stayed with you long after you put the book down. I cut that sentence out and taped it to my fridge. A month later, a full review came out. A sharp and lyrical debut that captures the unbearable weight of being unnoticed. I didn't breathe for 2 full paragraphs. They mentioned my name 3 times. I sent a copy of the book to my parents. Signed it on the title page. For Mom and Dad. Love, Melissa. I never heard back. The next time I called, my mom asked if I still worked at that publishing place. I told her I was full-time on my own projects now. She said, "Well, just make sure they give you health insurance. Those companies are tricky." I didn't correct her. Then came Glass Between Us. A novel I wrote mostly at night, in hotel rooms and sublets, and in the back of cabs on my phone's note app. I poured so much into that book I wasn't sure I'd survive the edits. But when it hit shelves, something cracked. It was the first time people recognized me at readings. The first time an editor called me instead of the other way around. It hit the bestseller list after a glowing profile in The New Yorker. I did an interview on NPR, a book club segment on morning television. My face on a poster outside an indie bookstore in the West Village. I told my parents. Sent them links. My mom replied with a thumbs-up emoji. My dad asked if I considered writing one of those political thrillers. Said they sell better. At Christmas, I came home and found the copy of my book I'd mailed them sitting on the coffee table under a pile of Reader's Digest. It still had the cardboard bookmark the publisher had tucked in during shipping. At some point, it just stopped bothering me. Not completely, but enough that it didn't burn anymore. They still told people I worked in publishing. Like I was just another anonymous cog at some desk. Even when my name was in the New York Times review of books. Even when people tagged them on Facebook saying they were proud to know me. I don't think they were trying to be cruel. I think they honestly didn't know how to see me as anything but the girl who used to write weird stories in her notebook and didn't talk much at dinner. Maybe it was easier for them to pretend I was still that person. Success, to them, came with a salary and a parking pass and a dental plan. So, I let them have their version. I kept mine for myself. The truth was, my name was out there. On shelves. In syllabi. In the acknowledgments of books by writers who used to be just names on a spine. And maybe they'd never say it out loud, but I'd built something real. Quietly. Invisibly. Without them. And maybe that was the only way it could have ever happened. There's this moment, every year, right after my flight lands in Richmond, and I'm standing by the baggage carousel, waiting for my suitcase, when I feel myself split in half. It's not dramatic or poetic. It just happens, like muscle memory. I fold the part of me that signs books and gives interviews and argues with editors into a small, quiet version that knows how to nod politely and stay out of the way. The New York version of me gets zipped up with my winter coat and left in the luggage until the flight back. What's left is the daughter version. The one who still gets introduced to relatives as Melissa. She works in writing or publishing or something like that. At first, I used to try. I used to walk into that house with updates in my back pocket, stories about readings or awards, or the fact that my second novel was in its 3rd reprint. But the moment I'd start to say something, I'd catch the shift in my mom's eyes, the way she'd glance down at her drink or change the subject mid-sentence. Once, I mentioned an event I did with a Pulitzer finalist, and she asked if I'd remembered to bring the spinach dip she liked. That was my cue. So I learned to shrink. I smiled when they asked about the weather in the city. I listened while Nathan talked about the expansion of his fitness brand or the new tech startup he'd invested in. I asked follow-up questions like a trained interviewer and watched him light up while he described app development cycles and partnership deals. My parents would hang on his every word. nodding like he was solving world hunger. I sat there, chewing overcooked green beans, wondering if anyone would notice if I left the room. They never asked about my work. Not really. My mom would occasionally glance at me and say, "Are you still doing the books?" And I'd nod. One year, I mentioned that Glass Between Us was being translated into German, and she said, "Oh, well, that's nice." Then asked Nathan if he was still doing that podcast. It didn't even feel malicious. Just reflex. Like in her mind, his work had real-world weight, and mine was made of air. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was what I knew would follow if I pushed. If I ever dared to say out loud, "Actually, I made the Times list again," or "They're adapting one of my stories for TV," I could already hear the response. That quiet, clipped, dismissive line I'd heard 100 different ways. "Well, it's a nice hobby, but make sure you have something solid to fall back on." As if everything I'd built still lived under the shadow of Nathan's business cards. So I didn't push. I became fluent in deflection. I asked about Aunt Jenny's dog surgery. I laughed at Nathan's jokes. I helped set the table and offered to take the group photo, even when I wasn't asked. I learned to blend into the kitchen wallpaper. Once, when I was 29, my dad walked into the living room while I was reading a new galley I'd been sent. He glanced at the cover and said, "Is that one of yours?" I nodded, and he said, "Huh, didn't realize you still had time for that." Then he changed the channel to a football game. Christmases became these strange rituals where I'd watch myself perform daughterhood like a role I never auditioned for. I brought decent wine, remembered everyone's favorite pie flavors, and pretended not to notice when my name wasn't mentioned in the family update email my mom sent out each year. It was always, "Nathan expanded his company to 3 new states," or "Nathan ran another marathon," or "Nathan and his girlfriend went hiking in Colorado." I wasn't bitter, not exactly. It was more like standing in a room full of people who could see each other clearly and realizing you were the only one in a fog. I started bringing fewer things home. No author copies. No press clippings. I stopped trying to prove anything. There was no point. If they didn't believe it by now, they never would. I could win a Pulitzer, and they'd still ask if I needed help with my resume. I remember once overhearing my mom on the phone with her friend while I was doing dishes. "Melissa's in town for the holiday," she said. "She's still doing the New York thing. Some editing job, I think." I didn't correct her. I just kept scrubbing the casserole dish. It wasn't just what they said. It was what they didn't ask. No one ever asked why I wrote, what it meant to me, what I was working on. No one said, "Tell me about your book." No one ever said, "We're proud of you." So I learned to be proud in private. I celebrated alone or with friends who knew the cost of every sentence. I answered emails from readers while sitting on the guest bed, surrounded by pine-scented candles and faded childhood posters. I learned to carry both versions of myself. The woman who built a life out of words, and the girl who learned that silence was safer than trying to be seen. I still go home. Not because I expect anything to change, but because part of me still hopes that one year, someone will surprise me. That someone will say, "I read your book." That maybe I won't have to split myself in two to make room for their blindness. But until then, I keep the writer version tucked inside. And when they ask how work is going, I smile and say, "Busy," and leave it at that. It was the kind of evening where everything looked perfect on the surface. The catering was flawless, white lights wrapped around the banisters, clinking glasses, linen napkins folded like origami birds. The engagement party for Nathan and Jade was being held at this renovated farmhouse outside of town, the kind of place people book for weddings they can't actually afford. Nathan had on a suit without a wrinkle in sight, his arm around Jade like a campaign photo. My mom was glowing, making rounds like she was hosting a political fundraiser. Dad kept pouring drinks and giving the same toast to anyone who would listen, to the future. I stuck to the background, as usual. I wore a navy dress I'd pulled out of a dry cleaner's bag at the last minute, barely touched my wine, and told myself to get through the night without having to explain my life to strangers. I found a seat at the edge of the long table during dinner, next to some distant cousins and a couple of Jade's friends I didn't know. The kind of crowd where everyone's either a CPA or engaged to one. Jade sat down across from me and gave me a smile that was warm but practiced. We'd only met twice, briefly, but she had that teacher energy. The kind of person who remembered names and always asked follow-up questions. She leaned forward slightly and said, "So, Melissa, I don't think I ever got the full story. What do you do in New York?" Before I could open my mouth, my mother, who had just walked up with a tray of mini quiches, cut in from behind me without even pausing. "Oh, she does something with books," she said with a wave of her hand, the same way you dismiss someone who collects stamps. "Nobody." Then she laughed a little, like it was a harmless joke, and moved on to the next guest. I felt my throat tighten, not in shock, just that dull, familiar pressure like you're trying to swallow a lump of something too old to name. I nodded like it didn't matter, Like I didn't just have my entire adult life reduced to a shrug in front of people who didn't even know me. I reached for my glass, focused on the condensation sliding down the stem. I didn't look up right away, but I could feel Jade's eyes on me. She didn't say anything for a few seconds, just turned slightly in her seat, one hand still under the table. Then she blinked, tilted her head, and said slowly, "Wait, are you Melissa Harrison? Like the Melissa Harrison?" I froze. I hadn't heard my name said like that in this house, in this family, ever. I looked up and saw her eyebrows rise, eyes wide but not mocking. Genuinely surprised, genuinely impressed. I nodded, cautious. Right, I said quiet. My voice always went small in these rooms, like it still belonged to the girl who had to wait until everyone else spoke first. Jade turned her phone screen toward me under the table, just briefly, like it was a secret. It was a page I knew well. A listicle I hadn't asked to be on, but ended up quoted from in 3 college syllabi. 40 most influential writers under 40. My photo was dead center. Hair pinned back, arms crossed, black blazer, the kind of headshot they run next to profiles about bold female voices in contemporary fiction. I had hated the photo at first, but now, staring at it from across the table, it looked like someone else. Someone who was allowed to take up space. "I teach English," Jade said, still stunned. "We have your story 16 minutes north of Stillwater on our curriculum." My juniors did a whole discussion on it. They fought over the ending like it was life or death. Melissa, you're kind of a big deal." The table got quiet. My dad looked up from his plate across the room, eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't know what we were talking about, but he could feel the shift. My mom walked past again, still chatting with someone else, still smiling, still unaware that she'd just dropped a match in a room full of dry timber. Jade looked around like she was trying to connect the dots. "Does Nathan even know?" she asked, half to herself. Then, catching the stunned look on my face, she touched her chest. "Sorry, that was probably out of line. It's just, your work really means something to people." I had no idea. I nodded again, still processing. The truth was, it had always been like this. I built something that no one in my family ever cared to see, and now, for the first time, someone from the outside had accidentally kicked open a door they didn't even know was locked. Jade didn't back down. She leaned in again, more serious now. "You should talk to the students sometime," she said. "They'd love to meet you. I'd love to set that up." And something in her voice cracked the air around me just a little. I didn't cry. I didn't make a speech. I just smiled softly, quietly, the kind of smile that happens when someone finally says your name and means it. Jade didn't even try to lower her voice. She sat up straighter, phone still in hand, eyes bouncing from me to the screen and back again, and said, "Wait, are you that Melissa Harrison?" I felt every fork pause, every sip stop midair. Conversations hiccuped, then stalled completely. One of Jade's friends turned her head slowly, like a bad sitcom reaction shot. The word that hung in the room like smoke, sticky and disorienting. Across the table, Nathan blinked. "What do you mean, that?" he asked, reaching for his glass like it was a lifeline. Jade turned her phone so he could see. Her thumb scrolled with purpose, stopping on the Penguin Books author page. My name bold in serif, bio underneath, jacket photo to the side. Then a list of published works. Echoes in the quiet. Glass between us. All the windows you never saw. The reviews below it were from The Guardian, The New York Times, NPR. Below that, a clipped screenshot from a PN America event. Me on stage in a navy dress, holding a microphone, laughing into the podium light. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just watched the ripple start to spread like someone had dropped a rock in the center of the table. My cousin Caleb leaned forward and whispered, "Holy shit. Is that you?" His voice was hushed, but clear enough to carry. A few heads swiveled. Nathan's expression was hard to read. Somewhere between disbelief and offense. Like someone had pulled a prank on him without warning. "You're published?" he asked, blinking again. "Like, actually published?" Before I could answer, my mother, who had been refilling someone's sparkling water behind us, laughed, tight and forced, and said, "Oh no, they must have the wrong person. Our Melissa she just does some writing, not that kind of thing." Jade turned in her seat, holding her phone out toward her. "Barbara, this is her. This is Melissa. Penguin Books. She's got 2 bestsellers and won a PN award last year." Then she flipped to the video, and the still image played. Me, clear as day, stepping on stage as someone read my name into the mic. The applause in the background swelled, even from the tiny speakers. I watched my mother's face go still. For the first time in my adult life, she had no words ready. She blinked, lips parted slightly, as if trying to figure out where she'd misplaced the script. Dad looked up from the far end of the table, setting his wine down slowly. "What's going on?" he asked, voice cautious. Jade answered before anyone else could. "Melissa's famous. she said, matter of fact, not even smiling anymore. Like, actual famous. This is her. She passed the phone to Nathan, who took it like it might burn him. He stared at the screen, scrolled, paused on a review that called my writing a brutal, haunting excavation of familial invisibility. Then another that compared me to Joan Didion. Then he looked at me. Why didn't you ever say anything? I didn't answer. Because what was I supposed to say? That I did, 100 times, just in smaller ways? That I tried, and they shrugged? That I stopped bringing things home because they never looked past the cover? My mom finally sat down in the chair beside me, very slowly. I didn't know, she said, but it came out unsure, like she was asking a question. You never told us. I looked at her. Just looked. Years of not being asked, of not being seen, of my name being a punchline or an afterthought, pressed up against the roof of my mouth, and I had no idea which part to say first. So I didn't say anything. Around the table, everyone kept staring. My uncle muttered something under his breath. A girl on Jade's side of the family said, "Wait, I read Glass Between Us last year for a book club." Someone else asked if I'd really been on NPR. My cousin's boyfriend was already searching my name on YouTube. I sat there in the same navy dress I wore on stage at the awards ceremony, the one no one back home had watched, the one I didn't even mention in the family group chat, because I knew no one would ask why I was traveling that weekend. I'd worn it again, without thinking. It wasn't a statement. It was just clean. Jade leaned toward me, voice low now. "I'm so sorry," she said. I had no idea. I nodded once. It was the first time anyone in my family had ever been quiet because of me. Not because they forgot I was there, but because they finally saw me. The quiet stretched longer than it should have. The kind that thickens in the air, makes your skin itch. Jade sat still, her phone dark now, resting face down on the table. Nathan was staring at the author page like it might blink and disappear. My dad had gone rigid in his chair, eyes tracking me like he was waiting for instructions. And my mom? She just looked stunned, like someone had thrown a glass of cold water at her mid-sentence. I took a breath and felt it in every part of my body. Then I set my napkin down on the plate, not neatly, just enough to make space for what I already knew I was going to say. My voice didn't rise, didn't shake. It came out exactly the way it had been living inside me for years, steady, careful, exact. "I didn't hide anything from you," I said. "I sent you my first book. I signed it. I wrote a note in the front, just in case you missed it. You never said a word, not even a text." My mother blinked like she was coming out of anesthesia. "I called you the day the Times reviewed me. You changed the subject. Asked if I was still working at that book place. And every time I tried to share anything after that, even small stuff, I watched you tune out. I watched you make a face like you didn't know what I was talking about. Like it was too much work to care. Nobody moved. No silverware scraped. It was like the whole table had gone breathless. I didn't stop telling you because I was trying to be mysterious. I stopped because there was no point. I learned not to bring it up the same way a kid learns not to touch a hot stove. Over and over, you made it clear. You weren't interested. You didn't want to see me." Jade lowered her eyes, like she didn't want to watch what was coming next. Nathan looked down too, jaw tight, shoulders curved inward. "I was never hiding anything," I said again, more quietly this time. "You just never listened." Nathan was the first to speak. His voice cracked right away. "I'm sorry," he said. "No theatrics. Just that. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I thought you were just, I don't know, doing your thing. I never realized you were." He stopped, like he was still catching up to the realization that his sister was a person outside of his frame of reference. "That's on me." My dad let out this breath that sounded like it had been stuck in his lungs for years. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands folded loosely, and said, "I didn't know either. And I don't mean that like an excuse. I mean I literally didn't know who you were. I thought I did, but clearly I didn't." That one hit harder than I expected. It wasn't warm, not even particularly apologetic, but it was honest. And that was more than I'd ever gotten from him before. My mother still hadn't spoken. Her hands were folded in her lap, eyes locked on the tablecloth like it might explain something to her if she stared long enough. She shook her head slightly, more in confusion than denial, and said, "I just don't understand how this happened. Why wouldn't you make it clearer? Why didn't you say something sooner?" And God, that one lit something in me I didn't know was still flammable. I turned toward her, not raised, not sharp, but clear. "I did. You just didn't hear it. Or didn't want to." She looked up, and for the first time I saw something behind her eyes that wasn't just dismissal or pride in Nathan or polite interest in the lives of others. I saw the edge of something like doubt. Not regret. Not yet. But doubt. And maybe that was the first real crack. I sat back in my chair and let the silence come again. This time, it didn't feel so heavy. This time, they finally heard it. A few months passed. I was back in the city, working through edits on my next manuscript, pretending not to check my inbox every 5 minutes for feedback that never came on time, drinking too much coffee, and forgetting to eat until 4 in the afternoon. Life had slipped back into its rhythm, familiar and quiet, the way it always did after a trip home. I didn't expect anything else. I wasn't waiting for some grand gesture. After the dinner, I figured we'd all retreat to our corners, each of us dealing with the aftermath in our own way. Then one morning, there was a package by my door. It was from my parents' address. Not the neat label of an online retailer, but handwritten, slanted slightly to the right, the way my dad wrote when he didn't use a ruler underneath the paper. I opened it slowly, unsure of what I'd find. Inside were new copies of all 3 of my books, fresh, uncreased, untouched. My name in bold across each cover. Tucked between the pages of the first one was a card. Plain white. No design. Just my father's handwriting. I read it 3 times. I read it. Your voice is important. You are important. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't some big apology. But it didn't have to be. It was the first time he had said anything like that. And I believed him. When Nathan and Jade announced they were having a second engagement party, this one smaller, just family and close friends, I was hesitant. I almost didn't go. But Jade reached out herself. She said there'd be no speeches unless I wanted to give one. Then she asked, gently, if I would read something. Just a small excerpt, nothing long. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The party was held in a modest backyard, fairy lights strung across the patio, candles flickering in mason jars. Everyone wore soft colors. The air smelled like grilled peaches and rosemary, and for once, it didn't feel like I was walking into someone else's scene. Jade introduced me as a surprise guest. A few people clapped, unsure what was happening, until she added, Melissa's going to share something from her new book. Then all eyes turned to me. I stepped up, held the small paperback in both hands, and opened to a passage I'd marked with a sticky note the night before. I didn't look at the crowd as I read, not at first. The words came easier than I expected. They landed clean. I read about a girl watching her reflection blur in a train window, trying to decide whether to disappear or announce herself. About how sometimes the hardest thing is not being overlooked, but finally being seen. The moment you know you can't go back to invisibility without breaking something inside you. When I looked up, my brother was standing with his hand over his mouth, his fiancée's arm looped through his. My dad was near the fence, nodding slightly, lips pressed together like he was holding something in. And then, to my left, I heard my mother's voice. Clear. Not loud, but not quiet either. This is Melissa, she said. Our daughter. A writer. And that was it. Not a confession. Not a rewrite of history. But for the first time, an introduction. A name, not a placeholder. I won't lie and say everything healed in that moment. It didn't. But something shifted. Something settled. The silence we'd lived in for years cracked wide enough to let light through. Maybe that's all I ever wanted. Not forgiveness, not applause. Just recognition. That night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, books still in my bag, the note from my father folded beside a cup of cold tea. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to anyone. I just existed. As I was.